morning, everyone. How are you? Well, welcome to Cambridge Judge Business School and the second edition of InnoFrugal UK. My name is Jaideep Prabhu. I am a professor of marketing here, where I also direct the Center for India and Global Business. And it's a great pleasure to be hosting this event along with Ignito and the Center for the Circular Economy. Before we get started, let me tell you a little bit about what you can expect over the day. So we have this first session, which will have a few keynotes, which will set the stage. And we'll talk about the links between frugal innovation, the circular economy, and the Internet of Things, which is really these are the themes of this year's conference. Then we'll have coffee and networking, followed by a panel discussion, and then lunch. So we've given you time to network. I think that's something everybody appreciates. And then in the afternoon session, we'll have workshops, again, in this room. First an enterprise session, and then a circular economy session. Then another break, and then we'll end with a conversation with Timo Bolt, the founder and CEO of Gusto, which is a meal kit company. So that's what we have ahead of us. And on that note, I'll now deliver my keynote on the topic of frugal innovation. So I've spent my career studying innovation, and in the first part of my career, I studied innovation in large Western companies, because in a way the received wisdom was that's where innovation happens. And then about 10 years or so ago, when I took over this directorship of the Center for India and Global Business, I began to look at innovation in emerging economies like India, where I'd grown up. And when I went there, I was struck by how the approach to innovation seemed very different from the Western corporate approach. So in Western corporates, you may think of innovation as being quite expensive, structured, and quite tightly controlled. Whereas in a place like India, you saw, first of all, that these innovators were very frugal. They were very good at doing more and better with less. And then secondly, the approach was not terribly structured. There was a lot of improvisation and lateral thinking. And finally, very often, the solutions were designed to be inclusive, to bring large numbers of people who are outside the formal economy into the formal economy. So let me give you an example by way of contrast. So here is something we may regard as an innovation in an affluent society. It's a high-end fridge that will talk to you, and you can talk back to via that tablet PC. And for that pleasure, you may pay about $3,000. Now, it's a bit of a caricature, but you tend to see this. And you may see things like this in a country like India. But you're equally likely to see something like this. So that's about $3,000. This is a $30 clay fridge. It just uses the cooling properties of water stored in this reservoir, not only to keep the water cool, but when it evaporates through the walls, it keeps fruit and vegetables fresh for up to 5 days. And I'll tell you more about the innovator in a second, but the intention is, it's obviously frugal, and the intention is to be inclusive. So my co-authors and I, we studied literally scores of such innovations, done at all levels, from the grassroots to social entrepreneurs to big companies, including multinationals. And we ended up writing a book on this subject. We called it Jugaad Innovation, using this Hindi word, jugaad, that many people in India use to describe this kind of frugal approach. And what we did in the book was to look at lots of examples and then try and extract some principles we thought were guiding these innovators. And really, you can see these are the principles: doing more with less, keeping the solution simple, a lot of improvisation and thinking flexibly, actually being inspired by adversity, necessity being the mother of invention, including marginal groups, not only as consumers, but also often as producers, and very passionate people who are really committed to making change. And we featured in the book a number of different types of entrepreneurs. So here is Mansukh Bhai, the person behind a clay fridge. Comes from a village in the Indian state of Gujarat, was actually inspired by traditional clay pots in which people store water. Went on to develop these, set up a factory in his village, trained local women, and then he sells these, including on the internet. So technology plays a role as well. Or Harish Hande, this person here, CEO and founder of Selco, solar electric lighting company. He sells solar solutions to people who otherwise buy kerosene, and his first problem was how to make this affordable. So its typical customer may spend 10 rupees a day on kerosene. And so he asked himself, how can I offer solar lighting at 10 rupees a pop? And his solution is really a business model innovation. So he identifies people like this from local communities who he trains to maintain and manage batteries, panels, and lights. He worked with a bank to give people like this loans, which he guarantees for 6 months. With the loan, this person sets up shop, buys the batteries, panels, and lights, and then charges them during the day, and in the evening rents them to people like a fruit cart vendor who may pay 10 rupees for that. And so you see these kinds of models to bring circular solutions, renewable energy solutions to people outside the formal economy. So you see lots of entrepreneurs doing this, but you see large companies in this space, including multinationals. So if you think about Nokia, for instance, in its pomp, it dominated emerging markets on the back of these kinds of frugal innovations, like this phone that was designed specifically for people living in urban slums. And they went and lived with people in the slums. They had insights which they then brought back, and those insights then resulted in a specific design and features. So this really affordable, robust phone also had key features like a built-in flashlight that was a killer app for people who typically had to see their way in the dark, didn't have regular electricity. And at one point, before the iPod came along, this was the world's best-selling consumer electronics device. And now the world is awash with mobile phones. I read recently there are more mobile phones in the world than toothbrushes, which is alarming if you're a dentist, but very empowering if you're trying to reach people outside the formal economy. And many of you may have heard of M-Pesa, a service that was introduced in Kenya by Vodafone's subsidiary Safaricom in 2007 to allow someone like this, a lady from a village, to use her basic Nokia text-enabled phone to call her son, who's working in Nairobi, to request him to send money home, which he could text her. She could accept it onto her phone and then cash it in a local corner shop. And now there's something like 25 million people in Kenya alone who have access to this service. It's more than the number of people who have bank accounts. And now you can sell other kinds of solutions to them, including solar lighting kits. So this kit, introduced by M-Kopa, will get installed in someone's hut. They don't have the capital to pay up the upfront cost, so they pay it off in micro installments using M-Pesa on a weekly basis, pay as you go. And so it helps the consumer, but it also helps M-Kopa because they can remotely monitor this unit. And if the person hasn't made their weekly payment, they can disconnect the panel from the lights until they make the payment. They can do that remotely. So now we're in the world of Internet of Things, in a way, little devices that are connected and you can smartly manage them. In fact, you have people in places like India, like Ashok Das, who has set up microgrids or mini grids, smart grids in villages in the Indian state of Odisha. 30 kilowatt solar plants which have meters and sensors that collect data on energy use and the system health. And the users, people from the village, there are Wi-Fi hotspots that enable them to access local intranet via mobile app to view their consumption, pay bills, and register complaints. So lots of these kinds of circular solutions now in emerging markets and enabled by cheap devices. So we wrote that book in 2012, and we saw there was a lot of interest in frugal innovation in emerging markets. But we also realized there was a lot of interest in frugal innovation in the West, for the West. And we realized that to a great extent that is being driven by a particular type of consumer we call prosumers, people who are more actively involved in the socioeconomic process and are driving at least three major movements: the sharing economy, the making or maker movement, and the circular economy. The sharing economy is, of course, one where you and I can directly trade spare assets with each other on some kind of digital platform. And this was relatively small in 2013, but expected to grow dramatically over the next few years. How will it grow so dramatically? Well, essentially because it is frugal. It is asset light. And you can see that here in this quote from Brian Chesky. You may consider Marriott to be a competitor to Airbnb. They would physically have to build this capacity. This would require material resources, labor, time. Airbnb can create that capacity in 2 weeks because they take what's already there, and then you just register on their platform. Now, the maker movement, we are particularly proud of this, and Eben was keynote last year, the founder of Raspberry Pi, a former alumnus of ours. And this cheap computer was initially designed for school kids in the UK, but it's now being used by their parents, particularly their dads, to make other frugal devices, often Internet of Things assemblies. And then, of course, there are others who leverage these very powerful computers we have in our pockets to do things like Cellscope has a whole series of medical devices like this otoscope, which enables mothers to take high-resolution pictures. If a daughter has an infection, send them to a consultant who's somewhere else. And this is a fraction of the cost of the standalone device. It empowers the patient and it enables telemedicine. 3D printers, this one is under $200, so within striking distance of households. But even if you cannot afford these, you can go to spaces. They're called fab labs or make spaces or tech shops, where you get access to a space with all these devices, not only traditional manufacturing tools, but also digital manufacturing tools like 3D printers, laser cutters, circuit board printers. But more importantly, you get access to a community of like-minded makers you can bounce your ideas off and be inspired by. And lots of things have come out of that. And I just want to talk about some of these Internet of Things devices. So this is a device that's come out of California. It's called the G-Thrive. And it's a stick that farmers can place in different parts of their field. There are sensors below and above the soil that record things like nutrients and temperature and moisture, and send that data to an app on a phone or a PC. And the farmer can then monitor their field and make better use of scarce resources like water or fertilizer. So Internet of Things, frugal innovation, and a circular economy meeting. Here's another example of that. This has come out of the Fab Lab network in Barcelona. The Smart Citizen Kit, which again is an Internet of Things device made in the Fab Lab, which you can buy off their website. So this is the unit you place outside your home. It records all this data real time and sends it to another unit, which is like a USB stick you stick into your computer. It sends the data to a central server. Lots of people in the city send this data. It's processed and sent back to you. And so you now have a sense of, if you had an asthma attack on Thursday evening, you know why, and you can do something about it. So you see lots of entrepreneurs, again, sometimes our students from places like Cambridge, small teams of 4 people, for instance, doing things that only large companies or the government could do 10 or 20 years ago. And so we wrote a follow-up. What does this mean for big companies? What are big companies doing in this space? In the West, we did the same thing. We looked at lots of examples and we extracted some principles. I won't go through all of them, but I just want to highlight this one in particular because this links with the circular economy, creating sustainable solutions. And you see companies like this, Tarkett, French flooring company that makes things like carpets like this. And they have a very ambitious ambition of by 2020 becoming a completely circular enterprise. So all the materials in their products, they will reduce, reuse, and recycle in a continuous loop. And they realize this is not just a technical challenge, it's also a business challenge, because you've got to move from selling things on a transactional basis to offering a service where you have a contract for, say, 5 years, but the company retains control of the physical materials. So they might have modular solutions, and only this bit will probably wear out, so they'll only replace this bit, and they can retain other carpeting in the rest of the room and recycle this bit. Paul Pullman, who's now, of course, ex-CEO of Unilever, when he took over in 2009, introduced the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan, which had, again, a very ambitious target of doubling the revenues while halving the footprint. And that, I think, is exactly what we mean by frugal innovation, doing more and better with less. And, of course, that leads to a lot of innovation in the company. Lots of other companies now in their supply chain are thinking about how to be circular, how to reduce their use of scarce materials. You see Levi's, with a waterless collection, wasteless collection, lots of world-class facilities in their factories, and then they share these best practices with others. And in fact, now companies partner with each other in the circular economy. So there is an industrial park in Denmark where companies have co-located their factories, and the waste heat from this factory may go in as an input to another factory wastewater from one factory might be an input to another, and so forth. So the individual footprint is reduced, but collectively too, they reduce their footprint. So having studied this phenomenon of frugal innovation and its links to the circular economy, I conclude that the world really needs this kind of frugal, flexible, and inclusive innovation. I think Western firms can gain by partnering or working with their counterparts in emerging economies and vice versa. And also large and small firms can work together to improve lives everywhere. And on that note, I'll hand it over to Joe from Ignito, and I think Joe is going to pick up on particularly those themes of partnership between West and emerging and large and small. So thank you, and I'll hand over to Joe.
So good morning, everyone. So I'm carrying on from where Jaideep left. So as you know, Jaideep comes from an academic background, spoken about some of the concepts that's there. And before I start my presentation, I'll talk a bit about how did we get to what we are doing today, right? So, and I think there is an angle to my background on how we got to Ignito, right? So my background, I spent about 15 years working in large IT services firms. What we would typically do is work with large corporates and run large programs. So let's say a large airline wants to create a new ticketing system. We would build those systems for them. And traditionally what is called as IT outsourcing is what the space that we came from. Over the years, as we started to help a lot of these large corporates, one of the trends we started to see was a lot of them were interested in trying to do new stuff, right? There are a lot of ideas sitting within a lot of these entities, but there was no way to kind of really create it, right? And at the same time, people like Jaideep are talking about, a huge movement towards interest in innovation, right? And a lot of these connects we had in the corporate world, typically these would be more tech-oriented folks. They would come back and say that, hey, you know what, we are also interested to pick up some of these ideas from the business or from the organization to kind of progress that into kind of something that we can showcase to the business, right? And a lot of what I'm going to cover is about taking some of these concepts and creating it something that's physically visible to people, especially when you talk about innovation, right? If you say, I'm trying to create, let's say, something around solving online payment, right? You can always create a lot of slides and say, this is how it's all going to work. Or one could actually create something and showcasing that this is how it's all going to work, right? So download it on your mobile app, see how it can work, right? So that's one side of the story. So there was, we felt a pent-up demand in the market, especially with organizations in the Western market to try to create innovation with not large budgets, right? And the gap clearly was a lot of these large IT services companies wouldn't touch anything that was less than $1 million in revenue, right? So if a corporate had 50,000 or 100,000 to create something around some of their innovation ideas, there was a lot of gap. And typically what they would then do was go to a lot of startups and say, hey, you know what, I want to build something in a mobile or cloud or something else. Now, expect that some of these startups have that capability, right? And I personally used to work with a lot of startups here in UK and also some in India. And the other gap we saw was that a lot of these startups would kind of create products or solutions for organizations, assuming that because it's technically very sound, it is something the clients would want to use. And what we then also saw was many of these clients would kind of look at these products and say that it's not necessarily the same way we operate as an organization, right? So with that as a background, I'll jump into, or continue from where Jaideep finished. So clearly, I think we spoke that, frugal innovation, simply put is how do you really do more and better with less, right? And that's, I think, very important. If you were to kind of link back to my background and the story I shared, right? A lot of large tech companies or vendors clearly know how to make programs work if there is a lot of resources available, right? A large corporate or a large government could go to an Accenture or any of these service companies and say, I have, let's say, 1 million, 10 million, and I want to run this large program. They have the entire methodologies and processes in place, right? But then how do you really try to do something meaningful when the budgets are not even just half, but maybe 1/10 that, right? So if you have a budget of, let's say, 50,000, how do you really try to get somewhere meaningful with that? And that's where I think we came in connect with Jaideep and started to kind of take the concepts from what he's been approaching to say that how do you, in an enterprise context, using technology, do more and better with less, right? And when I say less, substantially less. And of course, the examples Jaideep gave from how people have created these, Mitti Cool in India, etc. I think those are huge, reference point for us to work with, right? So we started on that, and then we started to reach out to corporates. And when we started Ignito, we were a team of about 5-6 guys. All of us have been in the IT services space, help a lot of large enterprises with a lot of these programs and solutions, right? And what we quickly realized was that within the organization, it was never a problem of lack of ideas, right? And I'm sure all of you would also look back in your own organizations. Every now and then you wake up and say, okay, so you look at your mobile, you have so many nice working consumer apps, right? So whether it is trying to use Uber or trying to sell something on eBay, everything is a lot more easier to use. And then you look at your organization, whether it's a corporate entity or a government entity, and you'll see that, okay, this system is like really, kind of way behind in terms of what's possible with what technology is coming through, right? So we started to kind of reach out to clients and say, okay, so if you have the ideas, right, and if there was a way to kind of help the idea to be built into something that you can take back to the business, right? Because typically if you say, okay, there is a mobile app that will solve all the problem, one would want to kind of take a mobile app, see how it works, and that's where you start to see the potential with what it can achieve, right? And the other thing we also said was, because there is a lot of ideas, the problem typically also then becomes is that how do you select the right idea, right? And what we also then saw was there are many organizations which were trying to kind of put a certain amount of budget, because if you are spending, let's say 50, 100K for a particular idea, right, 1 million could straight away give you about 10 to 20 ideas, right? And if some of it fails, it was still okay. And that kind of helped us to work with these corporates to kind of start to create something, right? And that's where I think, we started to kind of come in to say, we can really take ideas to kind of innovation. And I think there is always this confusion, or I'm sure a lot of you heard this, to say that, is innovation the same as invention? Or if you have ideas, does that make you innovative, right? And the clear example here we want to showcase is that if to be really innovative, we really need to start to do something. And as you start to do something and show some early success, that really becomes the start of the journey for you, right? Now, we continued on this. We started to do work with a few clients here in UK and some in the US. And over the last 3-4 years, we started to kind of pick up certain trends, right? Again, building from where Jaideep left off to say that, so they saw a lot of trends at a macro level. This is very much making it very micro to say that within organizations trying to use technology to kind of really make innovation happen, what are some of the things that we started to see, right? So the first of the points was, what I covered earlier. Clearly, there is enough and more ideas sitting there. Even there are today software available to kind of, excite the organization team members to contribute ideas, right? But then, of course, you can't really pick all the ideas and then progress them into something that you want to create, right? So clearly, there is that angle around how do you really take ideas into, production. Next was to kind of say that, okay, so eventually, let's say you are within an organization or a, governmental setup. Now you feel that, okay, for this particular area, we could create a, solution. Now, how do you justify the business case around that, right? Because eventually, if you are within an organization setup, everything needs to kind of, make sense from a business standpoint, right? People are not just going to do it for the sake of doing, right? So how do you kind of justify that was the second issue we started to notice. The third was kind of around saying that eventually if everybody starts to contribute ideas within organizations, right? there is always going to be that push and pull to say that, okay, why is my idea not selected versus someone else's idea, right? So who plays that referee within organizations or ecosystems to kind of agree to say that, okay, if there are 20 ideas, because the risk with a model like that is that, let's say there are 20 ideas, you took only 4 or 5 to the next stage. The guys who contributed those remaining 10 would say that my idea is not good, so that's it, I'm not going to contribute anymore, right? The other point we saw was, typically, like I said earlier as well, nobody wants to really put a lot of money into an idea in the early stage, right? Because I'm sure all of you also heard about a lot of stories wherein very large consultancy companies walk in and talk about large transformation programs and create a 3-year, 5-year plan, and you do all of this and then suddenly everything will transform, right? Today, I think there is a fatigue within organizations and enterprises to say that I really don't have the time to wait for the next 2 years, 3 years to kind of get to some kind of a result. I want to start to see something early on, right? And last but not the least, all ideas may not necessarily be core to the business operations, but it could actually make a huge impact when implemented, right? And I'll again cover some examples, and we'll have some of the speakers in the second half talk about some real life examples of how they have kind of progressed some of these ideas which initially looked like not core to them, right? For example, if you're a bank, one would imagine that the core area to innovate is your banking transactions. If you're an airline, one would imagine that passenger transactions are the core area to innovate. But then one would be very surprised to know that some of the best ideas could actually be sitting within the non-core areas, right? So this is the initial set of areas that we started to see, and that's where we started to kind of support enterprises with. So how do we approach this, right? So within Ignito, we kind of try to partner with organizations under 2 umbrellas. One is what we call as helping them with innovation services, right? So we don't claim to walk into any organization and say that, hey, you know what, we understand your business, so we will help you create those ideas. We always look at the organization to come forward with the ideas, right? So we are not the ideas guys. We walk in and say that if you have ideas, especially ideas that has been lying around because of lack of budget, give it to us, right? And what we then do is we take those ideas, and from our learnings of the past of having done large IT transformation, we bring those concepts into a much smaller scale. So quick 1 month, 3 months kind of time frame. We are able to kind of build some sort of prototype and showcase it back to the business. That's what sits under our innovation services. We also kind of do what's called as an innovation lab. Clearly, I think what we have tried to do is move away from the concept of a physical lab, right? Because today, I think everybody says, okay, let's do innovation, spend a lot of money, create a very fancy space, and then everyone is sitting around and figuring out what to do with this, right? You walk into a lot of these labs, you would see VR headsets, you would see, some sort of a display, and then, but clearly that's not really innovation. What we try to do within that is trying to build together a team of people to kind of, help them to, progress on the ideas, to say that, okay, so as a business, you might have a certain idea. We have the technology know-how. How do we come together to try some initial, prototypes around it, right? I'll also talk about partnerships here, because eventually we are a small company. We can't claim to know everything under the space of technology. That's where we partner with a lot of innovation ecosystems. One such is the Sussex Innovation Center. Again, you'll hear a bit about that in the second half. How innovations, ecosystems like the Sussex Innovation kind of work with startups and tech folks to kind of bring all this together to eventually still deliver on innovation in a frugal manner, right? The last point around that is, as we started to help a lot of enterprises with these kind of frugal innovation stuff, one thing that clients started to ask back to us is to say, we have developed a solution, they like it. Now, clearly the management is not agreeing to progress it to the next level, right? So as an example, I'll cover that in a bit more detail. So we're working with a large airport here in UK. So they wanted to develop something that could really speed up the aircraft turnaround times at airport, right? So, we created the solution. They started to use it at a, pilot level, and they was very happy. Now, to develop that into a full-blown solution would mean it had to have a much bigger budget. And the airport management said that's clearly not a core area for them. So they were not happy to put the money in, right? But then they kind of came back to us and said, saying that something like this is what, a lot of airports across the world would need. So we are happy to introduce you to 40 other airports. Would you then sell this to 40 of those airports, and such a way that you have economies of scale? We get to continue to use the solution at whatever is the fraction of the cost, right? And that's where we have created what we are calling now as Nuvio Ventures, right? So it comes from the word nurturing innovation, wherein we are kind of trying to build these product companies under the umbrella of Nuvio Ventures, right? So that's the kind of concept under which we are working. I'll talk 2-3 examples of what we have done, because it's all easy to say this is how it will all happen, but I think, clearly to showcase some success stories would kind of give you a sense on what is that we have been able to do, right? The first example I have is, work we did with a large, distribution company. So unfortunately, they went belly up. So a company called Palmer and Harvey and P&H, right? So been around for a fairly long time, and a lot of their systems were still kind of legacy, and they wanted to kind of really start to become, new age and get into the new economy, right? And the way we approached it is very much, so I'm sure some of you have heard the term digital transformation, right? To say that, okay, this company has been stuck in time, let's just introduce digital technology and then transform, and, a few million, dollars of budget, and 3 years, 4 years, everything changes, right? But our approach has been very similar to the way you eat a watermelon, right? So you don't really take a watermelon and just eat it all together, right? You really cut it into small pieces and start to eat it. And as you start to eat it over time, you realize that you finished the watermelon, right? So exactly the same model is what we approach there. Instead of trying to transform the whole organization to say, over the next 2-3 years, every system in the company is going to be new age, and you'll have the sexy, cool, mobile apps, etc. We started to pick one area at a time. So for P&H, we initially saw that the HR function or the HR area would be something that would create a lot of impact, because people who would go online to book a leave or even get their salaries paid, salary slips, all of that I think was still very much letter based or sometimes emails, etc. So we then created a portal for them, and because that initial small project we did created so much of an impact, the CEO himself was very keen to then start to use that as a platform to communicate to the entire large employee workforce about a lot of the changes that are coming towards the organization. Again, an example of, instead of trying to say, okay, let's create a budget of 10 million to do digital transformation, we started this project for about 50K, delivered the result, and the next one, and so on and so forth. So an example of how we try to do innovation in a frugal way and show results. The second example, I would actually kind of hold on for post-lunch, because we have David Lane from the Arcus group. So they are part of the Sainsbury's group. And so he will talk a bit about how Ignito has worked with the Arcus group to kind of create some of these frugal innovation solutions which have started to show success within the business, right? So I'll not steal his thunder, let hear it directly from him how a business has gone about doing it. I spoke briefly about how we are working with the airport. So this is with the Gatwick Airport, where we are working with them to kind of pick up a lot of their small ideas. As I said earlier, today within a lot of enterprises, there are a lot of people with ideas sitting around. Like I said, a lot of them have used or continue to use mobile phones with apps like Uber, etc. And then they see within their organization, those things are not there. So within Gatwick Airport, what we have done is that we have kind of agreed to a threshold of what could be a financial model. So anything between 30 to 50K, we take it up, we take an idea, create some prototypes, showcase it back to the business. And of course, some of this they would say that, oh, as an idea, it really looked like something that could make a big impact. But as they start to take it and trial it out, they say that clearly this is not making an impact, compared to some where they thought it was a low impact one. when they try it out with a small group, when they see that it's making a tremendous amount of impact, and that's kind of completely accelerate this to the next phase, right? So some examples, again, like I said, you will hear a bit more from David post-lunch about, a bit more in detail about how we approach some of this. So in conclusion, right, like I said, my background, my co-founders, all of them have come from very large IT services companies, right? And one question most of us used to get asked was saying that, is this really possible? Can you really create something meaningful in a 30, 40K budget, right? Because many of us have also been used to large budgets, and if it was 30, 40K, would it even make commercial sense to make that travel to meet the client, right? So, but I can assure you today that frugal innovation is happening. It's happening in enterprises. There are enough and more examples we ourselves have seen, and we are not the only company which is trying to support frugal innovation for enterprises and organizations, right? Second one is, there is a way in which you can approach it, because many people get stuck at idea stage. So there are a lot of ideas, people try to do small things, and then eventually they don't see results and say that this thing doesn't work, right? So there is a certain way in which, one needs to approach to frugal innovation. I hopefully covered a bit about it, and in the second half you'll see a bit about that again. I hopefully covered a bit about some of the success stories. There is many more success stories that are there that we are doing and continue to do. I'm happy to share this during the breaks if it's of interest to anyone, right? So that's my presentation. Thank you for your time.
So we'll go through all the keynotes, and then we'll take questions just so that we can keep it running smoothly. Now, our next speaker, Venkata Gandikota, is not here, so we're doing it in a frugal way. He's in Helsinki. He recorded himself, and I'll play his recording in a second, but let me just introduce him for you. So I mentioned how we wrote this book about emerging markets, Jugaad Innovation in 2012. And shortly after that, we were contacted, my co-author and I, by this Indian guy who was in Finland. He was in a university in a place called Jyväskylä. I don't know if anyone's heard of Jyväskylä. It's right in the heart of Finland, and I'd never heard of it. But he invited us there to launch a conference he was hosting on frugal innovation, inspired partly by our book. And since then, he has stuck with this idea. He created a Nordic Frugal Innovation Society, which has now spread across the Nordic region. And he has hosted this annual conference called InnoFrugal every year, and it's gone from strength to strength. It's now hosted every year in the center of Helsinki in a very big location, and it's over 2 days. And they invite speakers from all over the world, and they usually have it on a particular theme. So he's been a big supporter and proponent of it, and then he encouraged us to host and hold one here in the UK, to have a UK edition. So we had one last year, and this is our second edition. So with that background, let me now hand over to Venkata, as it were. I'm going to just play his keynote.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to the second UK edition of InnoFrugal Conference. Thank you all for attending this event today. I am Venkata Gandikota, founder of the Nordic Frugal Innovation Society and lead organizer for InnoFrugal Annual Conference in Helsinki. It is a great pleasure and honor for us here at TNFIS to partner and co-organize InnoFrugal Conference in UK together with Cambridge Judge Business School and Ignito Technologies. Heartfelt thanks to Jaideep, Ellie, Joseph, and Cal for making this happen. I will do my talk under 5 points. Point 1. I want to start with the Sustainable Development Goals. Unlike the Millennium Development Goals, which were aimed largely at poorer countries, the SDGs are designed to be universal. The idea is to involve the whole world in taking responsibility for development. The previous Millennium Goals only covered themes such as poverty, primary education, and child mortality. But the SDGs weigh on more heavy topics such as governance, institutions, human rights, inequalities, peace, aging, and climate change. My own view is that we cannot deliver the SDGs with expensive solutions, but rather with good quality solutions that are accessible, affordable, and sustainable, those which I call frugal innovations. Point 2. Now I want to give you a couple of quotes. The first one is the bitterness of poor quality remains long after the sweetness of low price is forgotten. The second quote states, good, cheap, fast. Pick two. Most, if not all of us, might have come across these quotes like I had on LinkedIn or maybe even other social media such as Facebook. These quotes are usually put out with regards to product services or project management activities. Um, I believe the quotes are supposed to communicate the value businesses can provide to customers, as well as the relationship between what the customer wants and what they're willing to give up to get it. But I don't think these quotes are entirely correct. Certainly, the quotes are easy to remember, but following them too closely could steer businesses towards the wrong path and may result in lost sales. To contrast the above two quotes and that way of thinking, I have a different quote, often attributed to Upton Sinclair, which states that it is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends upon his not understanding it. The point I'm trying to make is that all idioms contain some truth, but we should not take them as absolutes. And if we don't challenge ourselves to overcome established prejudices in delivering affordable solutions, we truly cannot achieve sustainable development goals. Point three, businesses can learn from Jeff Bezos' motto of customer obsession and not competitor obsession. I believe this matches with the concepts of design thinking and service design that has become quite critical for need-based solutions. Some time ago, I think in September 2018 in Washington, Jeff Bezos was talking about and giving the example of Amazon Prime. Bezos said that Amazon had developed the Prime program, which is a paid subscription service for free two-day delivery, because he knew consumers love free shipping. Introduced in 2005, the service was mocked for being too good to be true and helped underline the idea that Amazon is too inexpensive to be profitable. The message from the pundit class was clear. Prime is draining Amazon's profits and its stock. But a decade later, now it's clear that pleasing its customers rather than the short-term bottom line has been a very good business move for Amazon, which has Prime customers paying $1,300 a year in sales, double that of regular customers. What I want as a takeaway from this is this way of putting customer first can also help businesses innovate with the way to deliver new product design and development and come up with innovative business models such as platform-based approaches and product as a service business models. The fourth point I want to make. After we started InnoFrugal conference in 2015 in Helsinki, the first 2 years we were doing product and service showcasing, but did not have much focus on financing of these activities. By the third year of InnoFrugal in Helsinki, I started to really delve into what are the various challenges faced by entrepreneurs and businesses and realized that financing and investing was a major issue, pulling them back. But outside of big corporates putting their own money and state financing agencies and development aid agencies, access to financing was a big deal to get startups and SMEs to deliver these frugal innovations. And that is why I also identified impact investing, a new form of angel and venture capital funding, as an enabler of frugal innovations. And 2 years ago, we started having it as a main component in InnoFrugal. This year, the whole day one of our conference in Helsinki focuses on this kind of asset class, where we bring together limited partners such as European Investment Fund and venture capital foundations and philanthropies in a whole one-day conference, day one of our conference. What I want to say is, instead of doing nothing, there are increasing number of individuals and organizations out there who, by their ingenuity, are creating solutions as first-time entrepreneurs via social enterprises, or as traditional SMEs, or a part of diversified portfolio for big businesses. We applaud these efforts and want to accelerate the change towards a more inclusive society. And there are new investor class under impact investing that want to provide financing for these kind of innovators. Of course, delivering these kind of solutions are not easy, but that is where the challenge is in applying human ingenuity. Point 5. At InnoFrugal Helsinki this year, we are also showcasing on the second day of the conference what we call a Frugal Innovation Day. We have solutions showcased and also talked about, especially ones that businesses in Nordics truly get excited about. The first one is the topic of advanced mobility and affordable electric vehicle ecosystem. By this I mean rethinking design and development of these electric vehicles, the charging, batteries, what role composites play, and also, for example, mobility as a service. So those kind of things. The second topic is on affordable medtech, where low cost and new tech are coming together to deploy and make healthcare solutions more effective, accessible, and affordable. The third topic is on smart cities and increasingly smart villages. We all know that urbanization is a big issue across the world, and governments all over are piloting and wanting their cities to become smarter. But the big issue is the rural areas and villages. We need to help create smart villages because, one, it can be a way to lessen the migration of people to urban areas, and two, it can rejuvenate and help people be in places where they want to be. We at InnoFrugal have started this year a partnership with Smart Village Movementer Berkeley Haas Garwood Center for Corporate Innovation. I believe through these frugal innovation and impact investing mechanisms, we truly will be able to deliver the Sustainable Development Goals. I wish you a great conference in Cambridge and hope that together we can inspire and put into action solutions that can deliver the Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you very much.
That was Venkata, and our final keynote speaker is my colleague Khaled Soufani, and Khal is the director of our Center for Circular Economy. Over to you, Khal.
Thank you very much, Rajiv. Thank you. I think I have something here, but I've been a little bit too frugal in the sense that I would like to talk about it more than just showing something, because there have been quite a bit of slides with regard to what I would like to talk about here. I would like to add my welcome to the Judge Business School and the University of Cambridge. My name is Khaled Soufani, and I'm a professor of financial economics. I'm the economics group and policy group here in the Judge Business School. When we think about a circular economy, I mean, we cannot ignore the word economy. We can't ignore the word economics. There is a circularity aspect to it, which literally connects to sustainability. And there's an economic aspect to it which connects to consumption and production. When we talk about sustainability, we know that a lot of issues that come up, and there's a little bit of a confusion with regard to whether sustainability means circularity and circularity means sustainability. But if I give like a little definition to what sustainability is, I mean, we all know that sustainability is about avoiding the depletion of natural resources. That's the objective of sustainability, the avoidance of the depletion of natural resources in order to maintain some kind of an ecosystem and to protect the ecosystem that we have. When we think about the circularity, I mean, the circularity is an economic model. It's an old new type of model. It is a model that literally deals with using as few resources as possible for as long as possible, and extract as much value from these resources if possible, and then at the end of the life of that product or component or material, try to reuse it, regenerate it, remanufacture it, whatever the case might be. So to a large extent, we can say that a circular model can potentially be an enabler for the sustainability objective. And remember what I mentioned earlier, that our objective just to try and make things simplified. I mean, there's no point in complicating this concept of sustainability. Is that literally we're trying to avoid the depletion of our resources in order to maintain this the ecosystem. Now, what we know, at least based on the research that exists out there, is that if the world economy is going to meet the demand that exists by 2030, we're going to be needing 2 planets, and if we're going to be meeting the demand that exists by 2050, we are going to be needing 3 planets. So the question is that, one, is it sustainable? Is it reasonable?
is it doable? And the answer to all of the above is no. I'm like, it is very, very clear that we have overutilized a lot of the resources that we have, and at the same time we're creating a lot of waste. So it goes without saying that that there is an issue with regard to the air we breathe. There is an issue with regard to the water we drink. There is an issue with regard to the soil we use to grow our food. And there is an issue relating to the energy we consume. So if we think about these elements of life, and that is the air we breathe, the water we drink, the soil we have to grow our food, in addition to that, then we have the issue relating to the energy we consume. Where are we with respect to that? What's going to happen to our future generation with regard to all of these things? And of course, these are issues that we need to tackle, we need to understand, and we need to deal with. Now, from an economic perspective, we know that those of us who studied economics will remember the first definition that came literally in our first 101 microeconomics and economics, and that is, it is the study of the efficient allocation of the scarce resources in response to our unlimited wants. So basically, there are key words here. It is about the efficient allocation of the resources, but these resources are scarce, and we have unlimited wants. So when we think specifically about this definition that we have been literally talking about for many years in our schools, in our economic departments, in our business schools, and so on and so forth, we already recognize as economists that we have scarce resources. We already recognize as economists that we need to be more efficient. We already recognize that we have unlimited wants. So when we think about the problems that we have in the world, in terms of the environmental problem, that's what I'm going to be focusing on here, and that is the environmental issues that we have. I mean, to a large extent, a lot of these environmental problems, some would like to argue, I personally would like to argue that it is due to economic decisions, and the economic decisions relate to overconsumption, and in addition to that, overproduction, or at least inefficient production, or at least production that has utilized resources by applying what we call a linear model. And the linear model is the take, make, and the dispose of. So we have achieved economic growth by applying this specific model, the take, make, and then disposing of. Now, to a large extent, there have been advantages and, of course, disadvantages to the application of such a model. When we think about the advantages are very clear. We've achieved economic growth for many, many years. And this economic growth has been observed in many economies in terms of the generation of output, in terms of the generation of employment, in terms of the generation of jobs and income and spending. So yes, I mean, the world in which we are living in, economically speaking, is by far better than the world that we had probably 100 years ago or 200 years ago in terms of income, in terms of spending, in terms of choice, in terms of opportunity. But to a large extent, this has been a result of following this economic model, which is the take-make, which is a linear approach. And of course, we have now realized the fact that probably, and especially, at least from my point of view, after the financial crisis of 2008, for a period of time between 1994 and 2008, the world economy experienced an unprecedented and uninterrupted growth in the GDP. And we've seen that, about 13 years of growth between 1994 and 2007, 2008, which was unprecedented, because what we have in economics is that we usually have 5-6 years of growth and 1 year of a slowdown, 5-6 years of growth and 1 year of a slowdown, some kind of a correction. But between 2008 and 2018, we need to ask ourselves a very simple question. What kind of growth have we achieved in the economy, and where? And do we believe the numbers that we actually we saw, we observe, we analyze? And to a large extent, some of the major economies of the world literally have not experienced economic growth. Some economies have actually experienced a contraction in economic growth. And probably because of the way we define economic growth, there is that possibility. GDP growth seems to be the only type of viable economic measure of what economic growth. So, but we do see that despite the fact that we have a lot of innovation, despite the fact that we have we've had a lot of technology, despite the fact that we've had a lot of knowledge, despite the fact that we've had a lot of inventions and so on and so forth, but the reality is that we haven't seen any improvement on productivity. So there is an issue relating to productivity. So again, the question is that why is this the case? That there has been, despite the fact that we've got all of this knowledge, all of these technologies, we've all of this, but when we look at the productivity level has not really improved to the level that we think it should have improved. Now, again, it could be the definition itself, and especially when we think about productivity, it is about, you know, the growth of the GDP versus the number of hours worked. Now, is this an appropriate measure? Maybe this is something that we need to revisit, discuss, and try to illustrate. Now, this literally, the lack of economic growth that we thought about in many parts of the world, and the drop in productivity inspired some of us, and specifically here in the business school in Cambridge, to think about, well, is there an economic model which we can apply, or at least examine or test, where we can achieve literally economic growth with higher productivity levels that will deliver the goods to the consumers, to businesses, to government policy, and so on and so forth. And that is where the idea of thinking about a circular economy came into existence, and literally setting up the Circular Economy Initiative and then the Circular Economy Centre. I didn't know much about circularity up until about 3 years ago, quite frankly, and I was just your normal financial economist who observes the financial market and looks at the stock market and how the stock market goes up and goes down, what are the factors that contribute to that. But we were involved with a project with the EU relating to a circular economy, and that is it's trying to look at what we call fast expanding markets, not necessarily emerging economies, but fast expanding markets. And fast expanding markets about the existence of certain pockets of growth, which my colleague Jaideep mentioned, for example, in Kenya. I mean, okay, well, that is an industry that has been growing, but probably not other parts of the economy that have been growing in the same way. There are other areas in the world where we have some kind of fast expanding markets. And the question that came up basically in a gathering that we had was that did we think that the circular economy was a fast expanding market? And that is where the challenge literally hit us there. And the question is that, okay, where here we have a system where there is what we call a planned obsolescence type of system, that companies will produce something for a period of 3-4 years, and there's the end of the life of the products, and then you throw it away. And then if we introduce basically the concept of circular economy, then this is going to fly in the face of a planned obsolescence system. Is that the true thing? And then after we did some initial studies and initial analysis, it is a very interesting system that will enable sustainability. It is a system that will be an enabler for frugal innovation. It is a system that will be an enabler to even if a company is going to be thinking about planned obsolescence, thinking about reusing, remanufacturing, repurposing a lot of the materials and the components that we have out there, and maintaining the value of these materials. Because very, very important, what is an important element in here when we think about any kind of business model. I mean, remember that at the end of the day, I personally come from an economics perspective. So I personally come from with my thinking from a business model perspective. So in other words, what's in it for the company if they want to apply a circular economy model? Will it be what's in it for them? And of course, a company, any kind of a model has to have and show that for the company that model is economically viable, that the model is financially viable, that the model is efficient, that the model is productive, that the model will contribute to the corporate social responsibility. So when we think about the economic viability, the financial viability, the efficiency, as well as the productivity, we ask a very simple question. Now, if we're going to be suggesting the introduction and the application of a circular economy model, can we really say that the circular economy model for companies will create economic viability? So in other words, the bottom line, how does the bottom line look like, or will look like? I mean, when we think about the financial aspect in here, I can say the circular economy model is a model that will target your COGS, the cost of goods sold. A circular economy model will target your operating expenses. A circular economy model will target your direct costs as well as your overheads. So if you can deal with your COGS and your overheads as a company, then you're in fact dealing with your margins. And we all know the business existence of many companies depend on the size of their margins, whether it's a gross profit margin or operating profit margin or the net profit margins. And so the question is that, do we have a model where we can say, well, okay, yes, well, the circular economy model is going to improve the margins of businesses, and as a result, they should probably consider exploring the application of such a model. Now, I mean, I can say that probably, and we have to really, it's all subject to research and future investigation about the application of this model, is that in some industries will probably, and some firms will benefit more than other industries and other firms. Probably in some countries than other countries, and so on and so forth. But this is something for us and whoever is interested in this area to literally explore more. The other thing is the financial viability of the introduction of a circular economy model. The financial viability of the introduction of a circular economy model is to a large extent about, well, how can firms create value? Financial viability is about the creation of value. So in other words, can we say that a company literally will have a better share price or a stock price if it applies a circular economy model? I mean, I was recently discussing with some bankers basically about what constitutes a financially viable, a company that creates value. And some of the things that came up in the discussion is that probably, and this is only a probability, I mean, we're still in the early stages of trying to study and explore, and the more we learn, the more we realize that we don't know much, and that's the important thing that we want to emphasize, is that, but one of the things that we, anecdotally, we can, and a priori, basically just, we haven't yet proved it, but we would like to, is that companies that probably follow a circular economy model, or a model that focuses on the environment, tends to be a very responsible company. A responsible company is basically, responsible companies have stronger financial statements. And stronger financial statements literally send a signal that you have a lower probability of failure. And if you have a lower probability of failure, then your credit rating is higher. And if you do have that, then probably a lot of the pension funds and the mutual funds and the long-term funds and the impact investors would be interested in investing in these kind of companies. So in a way, it's a win-win situation, but we don't know about the returns, because we want to make sure that if you apply a circular economy model, would you be able to generate the kind of returns that we're thinking about? Well, I mean, if the outcome, and that is where frugal innovation would be a great solution for the operation of many of the companies out there, and that is to do things that are better, and to do things with less, and to do things that are, in the sense that increases efficiency, that increases productivity with less, then this is in a way will certainly be something that will be linked to circularity and a circular economy in some shape, way, or form. Now, I would like to emphasize that what we see right now in terms of the research in circular economy, the research in circularity is basically like moving floating islands, and they're not totally connected. Now, one of the things that we're trying to do here, in at least in business school, whether with colleagues and relating to circular economy and so on, is to try and build some kind of a comprehensive connected model, which links the macro, which you mentioned earlier, the macro aspect, to the meso aspect, to the micro aspect. We do have floating ideas. We do have floating islands. We have brilliant ideas that are going out there. But the problem is that, well, how can you establish a well-structured framework that says, okay, well, this is how a circular economy is going to look like. Just like when we know, for example, the origin of macroeconomic modeling came from here, from this university, especially the macroeconomics of Keynes and so on and so on. But we had a very sophisticated framework that says, okay, this is how a macroeconomy would work. And based on that framework, we can build on that. I mean, of course, we would like to have that ambition to try and build a framework for a circular economy model. And the framework for a circular economy model would be basically about looking at the macro level, the meso level, which, the macro level is not necessarily only macroeconomics, but basically society, demographics, and then policies and so on. And then there's the meso level, and the meso level relating to specifically the rules, regulations, market structure, competition, industry, sectors. And then the micro level, which is the companies. And we cannot ignore the fact that the literally major players in this model will be the two economic decision makers, and these are the consumers as well as the companies. And consumers have to literally adjust their mindset with regard to consumption, and in addition to that, companies have to adjust their frameworks, their model, in order to do things that are better with less, and do things that will utilize the existing resources that we have, do things with a view of protecting the water that we drink, do things with a view of protecting the air that we breathe, of literally the soil that we have to grow our food, and so on. And so that's all I can say at this stage with regard to what literally are thinking about. And we're hoping that a circular economy model in association with all these great ideas relating to innovation, frugal innovation, and so on and so forth, will become mainstream in business education. Because this is where we're heading in the future. And this is not only for us, but it is for the future generations, for our children and grandchildren. And we need to think along these lines, and I think we're taking the right steps in that respect. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Okay, I think we have about 20 minutes before our break, and Cal, please don't leave. I think we can together maybe do a discussion, and I'm sure people have comments or thoughts. It's good to see familiar faces.